Welcome, everyone. I'm Lorelei Tangi, the University Librarian at UC Irvine, and we are offering a live transcription of this event, which you can turn on at the bottom of your screen by selecting closed captioning or view the full transcript. I'd like to start today's program with UCI Libraries' acknowledgement of our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Ahashiman and Tongva peoples. We are so pleased you joined us today for authors discussion with Deborah Lipstadt, and this program is part of an event series that's held in conjunction with the Americans and the Holocaust, a traveling exhibition for libraries that is co-sponsored by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the American Library Association. Now, this exhibition examines the motives, the pressures, and the fears that shaped Americans' responses to Nazism, war, and genocide from 1933 to 1945. UCI Libraries is one of 50 sites in the United States and the only Southern California site selected to display this traveling exhibition, and it will be available for viewing until March 9th in the Jack Langston Library at UC Irvine. So we're so excited to bring this exhibition and related events to UCI and the broader Orange County community. And today we will be hearing from Professor Deborah Lipstadt. Deborah Lipstadt is the Dorot Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies at Emory University. And she's best known for having been sued for libel by David Irving, a Holocaust denier. After many years, she won her case, and she wrote a book about it called History on Trial, My Day in Court with a Holocaust Denier, which was later turned into a 2016 feature film called Denial. Now, in 2021, Professor Lipstadt was nominated by President Joe Biden to serve as special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, and her appointment is pending Senate approval. So we are so honored that she has agreed to discuss her latest book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, at today's event. So welcome, Professor Lipstadt.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. It looks a whole lot warmer there than where I am. So I'm sort of a little bit jealous, but that's all right. I also want to put in a plug for the Americans and the Holocaust exhibit. It's an excellent exhibit. It's really well worth seeing. So make your way to the library before it departs your parts. I come to you today to speak, as Lorelei mentioned in her very gracious introduction. I've been nominated by President Biden, and my nomination, because it's at the ambassador level, is now before the Senate and before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I won't be talking about any of that or any political items. I'm really taking off my nominee hat, if there is such a one, and putting on my mortarboard, delving back into the field of the university. And what I'd like to do for the next 35 minutes or so is really explore what is anti-Semitism, what is Jew hatred, how do we recognize it, how is it the same as other hatreds, how is it different? Now, it may seem ridiculous, and some of the people listening may think it's bringing coals to Newcastle, to borrow a phrase from the Bard. But I think there's a lot of confusion as to what it exactly is. And I've begun, having won the battle, at least with the AP, and not me alone, but with other people as well, to eliminate the hyphen in anti-Semitism. I think there's even a better term we could use. It'll never have the strength of anti-Semitism, because that's been around for a whole lot longer, but Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism is Jew hatred. Hating someone because they're a Jew, not because they're an awful person, which they may be, not because they're a cheat, which they may be. They're cheats in every group, in every religion, every ethnicity, every nationality, not because you just don't like them, but or you may hate them because you don't like them. Maybe they did something bad to you. But if you hate them one iota more, that's anti-Semitism. And in that sense, it's similar to racism and the other panoply of hatreds and prejudices. And sometimes when I'm defining it or working with my students on a definition, I'll tell them the definition from a European novel, I think of the late 19th century. Anti-Semitism is hating a Jew more than is necessary. And when I tell that to my students, they never know, is she joking? Is she telling the truth? What is it? It is in a way humorous. It's sort of that dark humor noir, we might call it, as we have film noir. But what I'm saying is you can hate someone, but if you add one iota, it becomes a Jew hatred. Now, let me start, first of all, by placing, and by the way, anti-Semitism can be directed as at non-Jews. If you think someone is a Jew and you hate them, or you discriminate against them, or you oppress them in some way, that's anti-Semitism, even if the object of your discrimination is not a Jew. But first, let me argue, and I don't think I have to belabor this point, but I do want to demonstrate it, how anti-Semitism is a prejudice, like all other prejudices. And I've already indicated, one person, you have an encounter with one person, a bad encounter, whoever's fault it may be, and you say that person acts that way because he is a Jew. In other words, you attribute their bad behavior to the fact that they are a Jew. Or you would say, oh, well, of course he behaves that way. He's a Jew. In other words, that explains everything. It can also sometimes be positive. You know, we all have heard the line, some of my best friends are Jews, Blacks, whatever it might be. And when I first heard that, I remember as a kid, I heard that with my father. We were in some store and my father was buying something for the synagogue, and the owner of the little hardware store said, oh, Mr. Lipstadt, some of my best friends are Jews. And we walked out and said, oh, that's so nice. Isn't that nice? My father said something which I didn't understand then, but I understand now. You'll never hear someone say some of my best friends are white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. In other words, look at me, I'm so terrific, I'm friendly with them. I get pat on the back because I'm friendly with a gay person, a Black person, Asian, a person of Asian origin, whatever it might be. You know, that's already suggesting that, you know, you're doing something special, you're doing something generous, or that you're friendly with the good ones as opposed to the rest of them. So in that sense, anti-Semitism fits in as a prejudice. It's no different from any of the other, as I say, panoply of prejudices. But anti-Semitism has its distinctive elements, which make it different. Now, one is, well, let me start by laying out another aspect and then using that. Every stereotype, every prejudicial stereotype comes with a template of negative things about the group. And each group's template is different. You can't take something from one and move it to the other. Usually it doesn't work unless they both share that negative prejudicial stereotype. So what's the template for anti-Semitism? Well, I usually say that there are four elements. One, something to do with financial power. Something to do, number two, something to do with smarts, but malicious smarts, nefarious smarts. Three, something to do with punching above your weight, small in number, but able to wield great power from behind the scenes, etc. And the fourth is that element of from behind the scenes, acting surreptitiously, secretly, against the non-Jew for their own benefit and doing their damage without the person who is being impacted by what they're doing knowing of it. So they come and they go, and they're, you know, you don't know, they're the puppeteers, they're manipulating the puppets. Now, so what you have, let's contrast, I think the best contrast is to look at racism. The racist, white supremacist, white nationalist, call it what you may, the racist looks at the person of color, particularly the Black, but not only the Black person, and says, if that person moves into our neighborhood, there goes the neighborhood. If that person's kids go to our kids' school, there goes the school. They're going to bring us down. They're going to degrade us. They're going to make us lesser. They're going to ruin the neighborhood. They're going to ruin the schools. When I was growing up, the euphemisms, it's a changing neighborhood. What it meant, not the neighborhood wasn't changing like all the, architectural styles were changing. It meant that Blacks were moving into the neighborhood and you wanted to get out, or you should get out, the person was suggesting. So that the person generally with racist stereotypes is often the same with a fear of Muslims, fear of Latinos, et cetera, that they're going to bring us down because they're not as accomplished, as productive, as smart as we white people. So you have, when it comes to Jews, you have that punching down element. Jews are dirty. We've seen it with COVID. Jews spread disease. Jews are disgusting. Jews are despicable. But you have something else as well. And therefore you loathe them. You also have the punching up, because if you go back to the template I just laid out for you of finances, power, using your smarts in a nefarious way, and doing it behind the scenes, the Jew is not just to be loathed, but to be feared for what they could do to you, how they can manipulate you, how they can spread COVID, or how they can take over everything, or whatever it might be. So you had that. There's a difference there, and the other difference I would argue is that there are two other differences actually, is that anti-Semitism, and it builds on what I just said, is a conspiracy theory. So in other words, it's not just that we dislike them. It's not just that we don't want them around and don't want to interact with them, but that they are conspiring against us. So remember, conspiracy theory doesn't just mean people acting against you, but secretly. Again, think about the template I was like, behind the scenes, engaging in efforts that are going to bring you down before you even know you've been brought down. And before you, and be gone before you know who did the damage. So the conspiracy, it's very interesting. Someone just, Yair Rosenberg, who writes for The Atlantic, did an article on this a couple months ago. And I think he made a very good point. It's sort of one of those points when you read it, said, of course, that's obvious, but he laid it out very well. That many conspiracy theorists, when they're looking for who started COVID, who took all our jobs, who did this, who did that, they will often they're anti-Semites, and they're looking for somehow to pin something on the Jew. But sometimes the conspiracy theorist starts out looking for someone who has enough financial power, has enough evil smarts, has enough political power, who knows how to work behind the scenes, who's doing this whole thing. So they may not start with the Jew, but they'll end up with the Jew, because that's part of the prejudicial template. And as I said earlier, of course, there are Jews who are, some people I dislike most, to play on the theme I was mentioning earlier, are Jews. But that minute you say the Jew, there is no the Jew. There are rich Jews, there are poor Jews, there are white Jews, there are dark Black Jews. There are, Jews who are atheists, there are Jews who are very religious. Jews come in all shapes, manners, and forms, as with every other minority group. So having said that, the other element that makes, it's not just the punching up and the conspiracy theory, but the third element I want to add to that is that anti-Semitism is something often called, and I think rightfully so, the oldest or the longest hatred. And because it has such deep roots and has been so deeply embedded in society, in different societies, it uniquely can come from anywhere in the political spectrum. It's not limited to the far right or the far left or the center. It comes across the political spectrum. So anybody who only looks at it in one place is missing the point. That doesn't mean that sometimes it comes from worse from one side, one point or another. That can happen, but it can equally come. Many of you listening will not remember the Soviet Union, but many of you will. And the Soviet Union was a tremendous source of anti-Semitism. Communist Party was a tremendous source of the anti-Semitism coming from the left, and now, of course, we see it often from the right as well. And not only from across the political spectrum, you can find anti-Semitism, as I told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee just a week ago. You can find it amongst Christians, amongst Muslims, amongst atheists, even sadly amongst a handful of Jews. You can find it in democratic countries. You can find it in authoritarian countries. You can find it Europe, Middle East, Latin America. So you can find it in countries where there are no Jews, which shows you how ridiculous it is. So it's got that different element as well. Now, how does it present itself? If we're going to go back to the political for just a moment, or before I go to that, do a very short, and if there are any historians on, I apologize in advance for mangling and mashing millennia of history. But people often ask where the roots, and some people go back to ancient Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, but I'm a little more modern, if you can say that, than that. And I look at it in the way that, in the roots in the New Testament, not that it was written to be anti-Semitic. In fact, the New Testament was written for Jews, by Jews, for Jews. But the way that story, the story of the crucifixion of Jesus, the deicide story, has been used and has been manipulated as an anti-Semitic tool over millennia. That the Jews killed Jesus because he wanted to chase the money changers out of the temple. They didn't care that they were harming this wonderful, innocent soul. Of course, Jesus was a Jew. The Jews were Jews. Everybody in the story is Jewish, except the Romans who actually kill him. But that's a fact. We're not dealing with fact. We're dealing with perceptions. But lest anyone think that I'm pinning anti-Semitism strictly in the context of Christianity, as I mentioned, it's all across the board. It moves out of that very, very quickly. It moves into people who are great opponents of the church. Voltaire, who hated the power of the Catholic Church, but when he wrote about Jews, wrote about them in the most despicable fashion. It moves out of religion altogether. Karl Marx. It moves into pseudoscience, the pseudoscience of eugenics, which we hear a lot about today. It moves Nazis, it moves into communists. It becomes it's a useful tool. It's a useful tool because it's so old and it's so familiar to people that if you've lived in certain societies, and we say Western society, but it's just not Western society. It's almost impossible not to have encountered it. That if you need something, you have to blame something on someone. If you have to call out someone as being responsible for something, say it's the Jews. Well, I know they're rich, I know they're smart, I know they're powerful, I know they're evil. So it becomes, it fits, going back to that comment earlier about the conspiracy theory. So I think that's also it's not one group, it's not one religion, it's not one type of government, etc., but it's ubiquitous, it's all over the place. Now, how does it present itself? Saying politically, looking at the far left and the far right. I'm not saying everybody on the left, I'm not saying everybody on the right. That would be prejudicial in the extreme. But when you find it on those far ends of the spectrum, it presents differently with the same template. The template remains the same, but it presents somewhat differently in the sense that if you're on the right, well, we saw this, because I'm going to show you a clip in a minute of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. The Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville was an effort, August 2017 to really unite all the far-right extremist groups in the United States. What it turned down to was a display of extreme anti-Semitism and equally extreme racism, and murder, and the death of Heather Heyer. She was mowed down by a car. But let's look if I forget who it is who's going to play the tapes. Go ahead.
Is this every lesbian clergy member in America in one place?
Wild.
Fuck off, whore! Put on a bicycle, kid! You're gonna take my picture home and masturbate, I bet you are. You will not replace us! You will not replace us! I got 2 followers. When you turn that corner, start stepping, let's go!
Wow.
Park down here now.
Look at this chick. Look at this chick.
That's what I was told. You know who Faith Bodie is? You know. Well, she called me. I met her. She's fucking down. She's over there.
Okay, if we can see just the first 20 seconds of the second video.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
Okay, thank you. That's it. All right. Let me point out a couple of things that we saw clearly in that video. First off, you noticed what they were wearing. Most of them were wearing white shirts and khaki pants. It wasn't by chance. They weren't wearing their, neo-Nazi T-shirts, their anti-Semitic T-shirts, etc. They were told to come looking respectable so that they wouldn't immediately be clear that they were Nazis. Some, of course, wore World War II Nazi-style helmets, but many looked rather respectable. They were chanting blood and soil. If you're not of our blood, if you're not of our soil, you are foreign. If you are a Jew, you are foreign. If you're Black, you are foreign. If you're Asian, you are foreign. If you're brown, you are foreign to white society. You didn't see many swastikas. There was one swastika there because they were told not to bring it. Because again, the people see swastikas, oh, we know who those are Nazis. And then in the, you heard them also chanting, you will not replace us, or Jews will not replace us. What is that? That is the great replacement theory, which argues that there is a plan afoot to replace white Christian culture with Black people, brown people, Muslims. But, says the person who projects this theory, those people, remember, go back to what I was saying earlier, those people, they're not smart enough, they're not talented enough to be doing this on their own. There's got to be someone behind the scene manipulating it. Someone who has the financial power, the political power, someone who does damage to others but doesn't care as long as it helps them, someone who knows how to be a puppeteer and manipulate others. Who could that be? Of course, the Jew. So that's what they were chanting, Jews will not replace us. Similarly, when in the Pittsburgh shooting, in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, when the guy went into the synagogue, he was prompted to go into the synagogue because there had been a billboard in front of the synagogue saying this Shabbat is dedicated to refugees and immigration Shabbat. So he went in yelling and shooting, you will not destroy the white race. And when there was a shooting 6 months later near you in San Diego and Poway, that was the same kind of motivation, and we've seen it worldwide. Now, how does it present on? So it's this: you're not of us, you're not white. Some of you may look white, but you're not white, and you're manipulating to destroy society. Even, by the way, at the truckers who've been tying up Canada's and the trade between Canada and the United States so badly, we've heard those kind of statements, as well. The anti-Semitism seeps in. How does it present itself on the left? And in fact, this is what we see more often than not on campuses, not all campuses, but many campuses. And again, not everyone, but this is how that, when it does present, this is how it makes itself manifest. It looks upon the Jew and says, oh, you're white. Now, of course, that ignores the fact that probably over 50% of the Jewish population in the world is non-Ashkenazic, non-European. You have Jews from North Africa, you have Jews from Ethiopia, you have Jews from Iraq, you have Jews from Iran, you have Jews from Yemen, Mediterranean basin, India, so the whole idea of Jews being white is, and also, of course, on the right, they say, oh, Jews are not white. So it's a sort of, but Jews can pass more easily. Many Jews can pass more easily because you can't tell that they're Jews. But what the person, the view on the far left of power, and again, I'm heavily simplifying things, is that power emanates from financial status and from racial classification. And if you are white and if you are rich, then you can't be a victim of prejudice. So when the Jew says, I'm a victim of prejudice, they say, how can you be a victim of prejudice? You're white, you're rich, even the person may not be rich at all, maybe poor student, whatever, but you're just calling this out to get sympathy. You're calling this out to cover up the wrongs of your people, whatever it might be. And so there's a failure to take anti-Semitism seriously. And that's what we see, particularly on campus often, but not only on campus. I don't want to just, brand the campus, but since I am talking to a campus entity, that anti-Semitism is not taken seriously. So you'll hear a whole panoply of isms. We have to fight racism, we have to fight homophobia, we have to fight sexism, we have to fight fear of Muslims, we have to fight racism against Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, et cetera, all of which are legitimate causes. I'm not in any way denigrating that. but you won't find anti-Semitism there. If you find it there, it's sort of an afterthought. Or as I've heard from a number of campuses that I visited, whether Zoom, whether virtually or in reality, students will come to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, however it may be termed on that particular campus, and the person will listen to them quite sympathetically and say, we're going to send it over to the Office of Religious Life. And the student will say, this is not about religion. Whether I'm a believer or not is immaterial. I've been branded, I've been attacked, I've been maligned, or been object of hate speech as a Jew. And there's a failure to understand, because Jews are anomalous, so Jewish people are anomalous in this, and that, yes, many are tied together as a religion, but amongst the Jewish people, there are many who are strongly identify as Jews, heritage, centuries, millennia, but don't believe in religion. In fact, often are anti-religion. So it's a people. We talk of Jews as a people, entity. It's not a race, because, as I say, you can put me next to an Ethiopian Jew who is darker than dark, or you can put me next to a Yemenite Jew who is swarthy and pretty dark, or an Iraqi Jew, Iranian Jew, et cetera, et cetera. But you have this notion that Jews are feigning a victimhood. So you will not have anti-Semitism included in that panoply, as I like to say, of hatreds, or if it's there sort of an afterthought. Jews are upset, they're complaining, we'll put it there, etc. And then conversely, flipping, when you have an act of anti-Semitism, it can be an expression of anti-Semitism. And by the way, it all starts with words. No genocide starts with people picking up guns, gas, machetes, as in Rwanda, whatever it is. It all starts with words. And that's very clear. So on the other side, sometimes you won't have it there when you have the whole list of different kinds of prejudices, or if there is an anti-Semitic act, it will be condemned, but those doing the condemning will often say, we condemn anti-Semitism in all kinds of races. We condemn anti-Semitism in all forms of prejudice, when the act has been an anti-Semitic act. It's the same thing that I learned from my Black friends and students and colleagues. When people began to talk about Black Lives Matter, and there were some well-meaning people who didn't quite get it, who said, well, all lives matter. Well, of course, all lives matter. It doesn't mean that someone's life is not, less valuable. But the problem right now, and this is long before George Floyd, but that certainly exemplified it as well, is that the attack, the denigration, the threats were to Black lives. So that's why we weren't talking about all lives. We were talking about Black lives. But when it's an act of anti-Semitism, I'll give you an example. On Capitol Hill, there was one member of Capitol Hill who engaged repeatedly in anti-Semitic tropes, traditional anti-Semitic comments. And there were people who wanted to issue a statement, not of any legal standing, but a resolution condemning what was being said. And there were a number of people, well-meaning people on the left in the House, who said, no, it can't just be anti-Semitism, this has to be everything. Well, right then and there, the issue was about anti-Semitism. So you get this feeling that people they don't get it, they don't take it seriously. And part of it, and I'm going to close soon to allow time for questions, part of it is that Jews don't present as your traditional victims, in part because they can often pass, so to speak, or many Jews can pass. And in part because, there's a certain resilience amongst Jews, not to say that there isn't a resilience among other minority groups, there certainly is. But look, less than 8 decades ago, in the lifetime of people still on the face of the earth, 1 out of every 3 Jews on the face of the earth was murdered. And yet here we are back. Here we are seemingly harmed by it, but we are harmed because 1/3 are missing. When you go to most European cities now, if you go to the synagogue, it's a museum, or it's maybe even not a Jewish institution anymore. If you go to outside of major cities where there used to be thriving communities, even in major cities where there were thriving communities, there are few Jews left. Why? Because they were murdered. The societies were unnaturally murdered. And they weren't murdered because they were white. They were murdered because the Nazis did not think of them as white. The Nazis were out to destroy this race. Now, just a little bit of Holocaust history. Had the Germans won, they would have wiped out many people. They would have wiped out many more Roma and Sinti, often called gypsies, but the better term is Roma and Sinti. They would have probably wiped out many, many homosexuals in many countries. There were different ethnic groups that if they had captured the Soviet Union, and different national groups that they would have wiped out, Mongols, others. But that could all wait. That could all wait till after the war. Only with the Jews were they driven. It had to be done during the war. They were fighting actually two wars: a conventional war and a war against the Jews. And they lost the conventional war, but on some level they won the war against the Jews, because Europe, which used to be a thriving, in many places it still thrives. I don't want to say that, but many places where there used to be thriving Jewish life, there's nothing left. So we see it today. We see it in many different ways. And what's disturbing to many of us, and in addition to the things I've mentioned, and with this I want to close, is that just 1 minute. What's disturbing to many of us is the normalization of anti-Semitism, the mainstreaming of it, that it's okay to say that. We see this, for instance, certainly amongst Jews who either wear a kippah or wear, as I do, someplace here, no, I guess a Jewish star, or who there's something identifiable about being Jewish in certain areas, Brooklyn, where Jews are beaten up, Jews are attacked, kids spit on waiting for the school bus. It's like it's okay. And come and say, well, so a kid got spit on, what's the big deal? First of all, it's a trauma. It's being an object of hate. And second of all, as I said just a moment ago, it always begins with words. It always begins with small acts. No genocide, no massive attack, and I'm not predicting a genocide at all, ever began with someone picking up a gun, a machete, or building a gas chamber. It began with words, 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 and building up. And the last point I want to make is we should all be we should all revile anti-Semitism in and of itself. It is a hateful thing. It is it's hate, it's prejudice, as we say, of the oldest kind, and often venomous kind. But there's another reason, is that it, as many of the people who look at this say, it starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. It's a kind of hatred that spreads out. We see that today. We see that whether we saw it in Charlottesville, which of course was ostensibly about a statue, a Robert E. Lee statue, but had this anti-Semitic Nazi rhetoric. Many of the symbols you saw were Nazi-like symbols, just spread through it. Hatred, it's not like there's a limited bandwidth for concern about hatred. My argument is that if you're against one, you've got to be against all of them. If you're bothered, not just for certainly for moral reasons, but also strategically, because it starts with one group, it doesn't end with that group, it spreads, and we're seeing so much of that today. I'm going to stop here, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Lipstadt, for providing your insights on anti-Semitism and increasing our understanding about the topic of hatred of Jews. We have a number of questions, and the way people can submit their questions is to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and I'll go ahead and start off with the first one. How do you respond to the argument that addressing anti-Semitism is not as urgent as addressing racism against BIPOC people or Islamophobia against Muslims because Jews are not underrepresented?
I think I disagree with it. First of all, you start hating. Oh, it's okay to hate one group because they're secure or whatever, but it's not okay to hate another group. I find that disturbing. I find that it doesn't stay in one group. And I look back, as I said, 8 decades ago, 1 out of every 3 Jews was on the face of the earth was destroyed. The German Jew, where it started, Germany, the German Jewish population was a solidly middle class, some were upper class population, well integrated, etc. And look how it can turn around. So I find that disturbing. That doesn't, it's not like, you know, there's a set number of points that we can give to concern about hatred. It's an interlocking directory. And as I said, in Charlottesville ostensibly people thought it was about race. And it was about race. It was an attack on Black people. It was horrific in that way, but it was also an attack on and the Nazi rhetoric was so deeply embedded. You saw that in the symbols. I didn't have a chance to speak over the video, but you saw a couple of swastikas, but you saw all some of those other symbols, like a circle with a mosaic circle. That's a Nazi, that's an SS related, it's called the Black Sun. You saw lots of Nazi symbolism there, but sort of slightly under the radar screen.
Great. Here's another question. Please comment on the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and whether its adoption is useful or recommended.
The IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, a group of countries that different countries are ours included, that got together, starting, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, to talk about Holocaust remembrance, working together on Holocaust remembrance, teaching the lessons of hatred, et cetera, et cetera. And they found that many people didn't really understand, police agencies, prosecutors, defense attorneys, whatever, didn't really understand what is anti-Semitism. So they came up with this working definition. In other words, it's a tool. It's not a set thing in law, but it's a tool for understanding anti-Semitism. And they give a set of examples, some of which have to do with Israel, when your attacks on Israel of a certain kind, not on Israeli policy. That's not anti-Semitism. You want to see attacks on Israeli policy, go to Israel and let's sit in a coffee shop and you'll hear everybody criticizes the government. That's the national sport in Israel. But I think it has nuanced aspects, some of which are often ignored. Even in its list of examples, it says these examples may constitute anti-Semitism, may not constitute anti-Semitism. And I like it also because it stresses context. What is the context of what is being said? You know, a lot of anti-Semitism is often expressed by the clueless person. We see that with racism, certainly, where the person doesn't even know what they're saying is anti-Semitic. And sometimes they need educating. But there are other definitions, too, that have been offered, some of which addressing shortcomings in the IHRA definition. If the IHRA definition had been written a decade earlier, it would have been a little different. My sense is use whatever tools are out there to fight this hatred.
Thank you. Here's the next question. Please comment on the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, including UC campuses.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. And on the campus is a place which traditionally goes for the underdog, you know, it's sort of, that's the natural inclination of campuses. I've spent my whole life on campuses. But what we've seen in recent years, and this is not about politics and not about, you know, one group or another group supporting one side, another side, but we've seen a acceptance of anti-Semitism and almost a demand that, you know, of Jews that they follow a certain foreign policy. In other words, reject all connection with Israel, and then we'll accept you. It's almost like, you know, you have to come and lay your bona fides on the ground in order to be fully accepted. It's very disturbing. And I was recently in conversation with students at a very fine, small liberal arts college in the Northeast. There are a lot of them, so I can say it without everyone knowing exactly which one I was. And hard to get into students. They're a very select group. And they said that they have been told repeatedly, Jews are not liked on this campus. All Jews, doesn't matter what your political position is, doesn't matter what your financial, just Jews. You're a Jew, I don't like you. That's prejudice. And we're seeing more and more of that. I've been talking to provosts, I've been talking to college presidents, and they're suddenly waking up to that my Jewish students somehow feel that they're on the defensive, or if they're going to have a good 4 years on campus, they go underground as Jews, hide their Jewish identity, something which a racial minority can't do. But they hide their Jew. But going underground, going, to borrow a phrase which we usually associate with the LGBTQ community, if going into the closet as a Jew is not it's never healthy to be in the closet. Hide who you are. Never ever healthy, including as a Jew.
Great. So here's the next question. This person writes that you call anti-Semitism Jew hatred, and what strikes me is that this is different from a notion of hatred of Judaism. And yet in this country, anti-Semitism is recorded as hatred targeting a religious group, which I believe leads to much confusion about anti-Semitism. Could you say more about the notion of Jew hatred and how it aligns with the idea of Jews as a people as opposed to a religious group?
Well, the person is getting to the question of what I was trying to deal with, but obviously it takes much more than that. I wrote a whole book on it, but I appreciate the question. That's what again makes it confusing. Well, if I attack a Jew, does it go to the religious life office because it's kid was walking across the street, maybe wearing a kippah, maybe wearing a t-shirt with a Jewish star, maybe wearing a Jewish star, but it's a hate crime. It's a hate attack, as much as an attack would be on any other group, minority group, or on campus. But Jews are both. There are people I know who feel their Jewish identity strongly. This has been part of my family for centuries. It goes, grandmothers, great grandmother, grandparents, whatever. But they don't feel it as this is how I believe in this particular, or my belief in this God, or my belief in these kind of religious ideals. It transcends that. It can be that, but it transcends it, and that's, I think, also why there's often confusion. It goes beyond the religious identity. That's why we so often talk about Jews as a people, as opposed to a religion, certainly not an ethnicity, because they're Jews of all different colors, shapes, sizes, places, etc. But certainly genetic studies have shown great similarities and great shared things. But it's I think thinking of it as a peoplehood is a much better way of trying to get to understand.
Thank you. Here's the next question. Where did the hate for Jewish individuals come from, and why?
Wow, you have 5 years and 27 books to read or something. I think a lot of it has its roots in the breaking away of Christianity from Judaism. Christianity is it calls itself the daughter religion, or looks upon Judaism as the mother religion or whatever. But in an attempt to differentiate, to make it clear that you couldn't be both, or you couldn't move between, it wasn't a flexible kind of identity. There was also a sense within the church that evolves, particularly as the church moves to Europe, to Rome, and etc., of what we call supersessionism. It's a Christian concept. It's a Christian theological concept that Christianity has come to supersede Judaism. It is the daughter religion, but it is the next step. And for Jews to continue to maintain their Jewish identity is anachronistic. doesn't make sense. You're holding on to something that's not just old-fashioned, but been superseded by something so much more enlightened, so much better. If we think, I think it's outside of Notre Dame, which of course suffered such a tragedy in the fire recently, but there were statues, and there was one statue of the church, beautiful woman, beautifully coiffed, etc. And then there was a statue of, I believe it's synagogue, and a woman, hair disheveled, serpent, blindfolded. In other words, there's the beautiful thing, and there is the evil thing, the blinded thing, etc. So it was to turn the Jew into other. It also, from a so I don't know, sociological, political, communal perspective, it was very easy. You needed a common enemy. So if there was bubonic plague, blame the Jews. If the crops went bad and the taxes were raised, blame the Jews. The Jews were sort of in this in between as a minority that refused to disappear. I mean, that's part of the problem, that Jews have refused to disappear. It makes no sense. It makes no sense as a historian that we're still here. So it starts there. I don't want to say it stays there. It starts there, but the notion then is secularized. Jews are other, Jews are tricky, Jews are blinded, and it moves outside. But I think that's a lot of the sources, the roots.
Thank you. So here's the next question. Many Jew haters gain entry into a group or organization through being like-minded, but it is not a belief, but a way to be one of the group. So if you could comment on how to address this.
Yeah, well, we see that with all forms of prejudice. You know, the kid who, girl, boy, whatever, who joins a group and they're suddenly engaging in racist comments or terribly sexist comments. And you want to be accepted. You want to be one of the group. You don't want to call them out. You don't want to say, hey, that's wrong. Don't say that. Don't do that, etc. When students come to me on sort of, they ask me personally, they tell me there was an incident, a group of their friends were making cracks, a couple of guys or gals were getting drunk and they were talking about you, They didn't want to say anything, they often say, because I want them as friends. I didn't want them to dislike me or whatever. And sometimes I just can't hold back and I say, is that the group of people you want as friends? Who engage in those kind of comments, whether it's about Jews, whether it's about people of color, whether it's about people with a sexual orientation or sexual identity, whatever it might be, they're usually not worth having as friends.
Thank you. So the next question is, how did you feel about Whoopi Goldberg's Holocaust comments? And do you think it is indicative of a wider held belief in Hollywood or amongst other minorities? How should we move forward so that the Holocaust is taken seriously for future generations?
I think, first of all, I think what Whoopi Goldberg said was wrong, and she acknowledged it the next day and she apologized. I don't think she should have been suspended, you know, and I come from a tradition where apologies and repentance, where people says I was wrong, that's it. You set it aside and you move forward. And she was clearly meeting with people and being educated about it. You know, I think I didn't see many people calling her anti-Semitic. I very few was certainly, but I did see people somewhat shocked at the confusion that after all these years and so much talk about the Holocaust and so much study about the Holocaust, that there was such a deep confusion about what it was. It wasn't two white people fighting, groups of white people fighting each other. The Germans made it very clear that in their eyes, Jews were Untermenschen, under people, lesser than humans, subhumans, that they were a race that had to be exterminated. So in that sense, it was about race, even though many of those that they were killing, most of those that they were killing did not look different, racially different. So I think that was what was disturbing to me was the fact that there was such confusion still at this stage by someone who was a smart person, an accomplished person, and has certainly been exposed to many ideas. It was just a sign of how much educating we have to do. I think it was also a sign of a failure to really understand. And that's why I've spent the past, almost ending now, hour trying to explain what it is and why. And some of the questions also made me focus on this more, why it's sometimes hard to get your hands around. You look at someone, you see a Jew, white person, that's it, but it doesn't work that way. And certainly not in the eyes of the anti-Semite. I hope it was a learning moment. I hope it was a teaching moment. So that's sort of what I think.
Okay, and here's the last question. I'm going to actually combine a couple. Could you comment on Israel? To what extent is criticism of Israel anti-Semitic?
Criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic, and I know no rational person who would say that. As I said earlier, you go to Israel, sit down in a cafe, whether it's in Tel Aviv, in the north, in the south, in Jerusalem, and you will hear people criticizing the government, saying, doesn't matter who is prime minister, what was he think, Criticism of Israeli policy is no more anti-Semitic than criticism of American policy is anti-American. Israel's a free country, and you'll find a very vibrant critique there. And in this country, you'll find a vibrant critique amongst Jews as well. So no, it's not that. It's when you ascribe certain characteristics to Israel that are traditionally anti-Semitic. Well, Israel, of course, Israel is like that because Jews are so ... Or, as we saw last spring, I don't know if it happened in Orange County, but certainly happened in Los Angeles County in Los Angeles, attacks on Jews because they were upset with what was going on in Israel. That makes as much sense as my going into a Chinese restaurant. These happen in kosher restaurants, etc. My going to a Chinese restaurant where Chinese, whether Chinese Americans or Chinese from China are eating or whatever, and beating them up because I don't like how China's treating the Uyghurs, the Chinese Muslims. That was anti-Semitic. So I think, but I think you have to be careful. Be careful not of criticism. Criticism is a healthy thing, especially if done in a constructive way. But when you ascribe to, when you put all the blame on one side, when you ascribe to it things that aren't really happening, when you use a double standard, then you have to ask why in this case and why not in other.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Lipstadt. If we were meeting in person, you would have over 130 people clapping and applauding you, and I wish you could hear that. And we are so honored that you have been here today as our speaker, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and fight the good fight. Hate is hate, and it must be fought.
Here. And now I'm going to do some closing remarks and share some upcoming events. The Americans in the Holocaust Traveling Exhibition, which is on display until March 9th, asks some tough questions about America's role in this part of history. And it prompted us to ask the question, what was happening in Orange County? How were we impacted by the war effort? And so this inspired us to create a complementary exhibit called Snapshots of Orange County in the 1940s, Spaces, Places, Faces. And this exhibit explores the cultural and economic and political landscape of Orange County during this era. It highlights the histories and experiences of diverse multicultural communities in Orange County, including a section on the Jewish community in Orange County during the 1940s. And I'd like to thank Dahlia Taft, the director of the Orange County Jewish Historical Society, for her help on this section. Now, the exhibit also shows how the introduction of Army and air bases brought soldiers and their families from all over the country to our region and changed the demographics and cultural norms. And so for more information about this exhibit, please visit the link on the slide or scan the QR code using your smartphone. Now, this exhibit was curated by 4 people: Nicole Arnold, research librarian for student success and instruction; Cynthia Johnson, head of reference department in Groningen Medical Library; John Sisson, research librarian for biological sciences; and Dr. Crystal Tribbett, the curator for Orange County Regional History and research librarian for Orange County. And this exhibit will be on display through fall in the Muriel Ansley Reynolds Gallery, which is in the lobby of the Jack Langston Library during our regular library building hours. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment to thank our donors. It is through your generosity that the UCI Libraries can present exciting events, such as this traveling exhibition and related programs, which support education and learning on campus and in the community. And as you can see from this slide, there's many ways to support the libraries, from our Orange County Regional History Collection to our Gateway Societies that supports our public events and programs like today's event. But let me highlight one special project. Within the UCI Library Special Collections and Archives Department, we're proud to have over 120 oral histories of Orange County Holocaust survivors and liberators that were recorded in the early 1990s by the Anti-Defamation League of Orange County. And these oral histories are on VHS videotapes, and we would like to digitize them and add transcriptions that will make their stories available online to the world. And if you'd like to support this initiative, please consider making a gift to this project that will honor and provide access to these important oral histories. And to learn more, visit the link on this slide. Now, today's event is just one of 6 events we have planned in conjunction with Americans in the Holocaust exhibition. And tomorrow we will host an author discussion with Jeffrey Weidlinger from 5:30 to 6:30 via Zoom. Jeffrey is the Joseph Brodsky Collegiate Professor of History and Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan. He will discuss his latest book, In the Midst of Civilized Europe, the Pogroms of 1918 to 1921. Professor Weidlinger will share how the murder of Jews in the Ukraine during 1918 to 1921 was a chilling foreshadowing of the Holocaust. And he draws upon long neglected archival materials, including thousands of newly discovered witness testimonies, trial records, and official orders. And you can register for that free event on our website or scan the QR code. Now in March, we will be hosting 2 events. On March 1st, we will host Seeking Asylum Then and Now with documentary filmmaker Rory Kennedy and former Director of Curatorial Affairs at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Scott Miller. That's from 5:30 to 6:30 on Zoom. Their discussion will be moderated by UCI Libraries Research Librarian for Digital Humanities, History, and African American Studies, Tatiana Bryant. And they will discuss the parallels between the historic impact of the asylum-seeking voyage of the MS St. Louis in 1939 and modern-day refugee crises that are occurring around the globe. On March 8th, from 5:30 to 6:30, we will host a conversation between Deborah Lipstadt and UCI Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Professor of History, Douglas M. Haynes, and they will discuss confronting extremism and anti-Semitism in today's world. I want to extend a special thank you to the UCI Center for Jewish Studies and the Jewish Federation of Orange County for their partnership on our event series. And we are also very grateful for the support and collaboration with many other partners on campus. And thanks to the UCI Libraries team, the many library employees, current and past, who helped to make the traveling exhibition and our public programs possible. A recording of this event will be posted on the UCI Libraries YouTube channel, and a link to this recording will also be included in a follow-up email. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll attend our next events.